Thank you for joining us for another edition of City Corner, an ongoing discussion program about what's going on in our community. My name is Trish Herron, and I'm the Communications and Marketing Manager for the City of Richland. Joining us today is Jeff Peters, Transportation and Development Manager for the City of Richland. Thanks for joining us.
You're welcome.
So we're going to talk about projects a little bit later on. Do you want to talk about the network of transportation that we have within the city?
Yeah, we have a very good network right now, and we need to make sure that we continue as we grow going forward to continue to have a good transportation network. So it primarily focuses on major arterials, which are designed to get people from one area to another, and then gets smaller from there with collector streets, which collect people from neighborhoods to get them to arterial streets, and then the local network that is just to get residents around their neighborhood and to their houses. So
when we're talking about the network, it's not, you have a plan called the Transportation Improvement Plan?
We have a citywide transportation plan that was developed and approved back in 2005. And that looks at the whole city limits and kind of what the overall network needs to look like to accommodate that in the future. We also have a regional transportation plan that our Council of Governments puts together that combines all of the city's transportation planning into the whole region, and so all the city's plan fits within that regional plan as well. And then from that we develop our 6-year transportation plan, which identifies projects that we think could happen within the next 6 years as part of that network.
And part of that planning is to make sure that you have the available space, or it's a long-term approach versus, oh, there's a big development going on in this area, let's focus it on that. It's a city-wide effort, including all of Richland, correct? It's not just the new development.
Absolutely. And the biggest benefit to that is when development does come to Richland in areas that are undeveloped, we know what the network needs to look like, so we can have them build that infrastructure as part of their development, as opposed to having the city try to secure revenue and build those streets either ahead of time, which can lead to vandalism and just streets in the middle of nowhere,
right,
and maintenance and deterioration and all those things, so that the streets are getting built when they need to be built in the areas they need to be built, and we know where those are by doing planning ahead of time.
So you mentioned it a little bit ago about there's different types of streets, but what are the functions if someone's not familiar with those types of that terminology?
Right, so there's different what's called functional classifications for streets. We have what's called a principal arterial street, which is like George Washington Way, is a good example. North Stevens Drive, Keene Road, those are principal arterial streets, and those are generally designed to have the heaviest volumes of traffic, and they're designed to get people from one area to another, even in between cities. So those are the primary routes for large volumes of traffic. Then we have collector streets, or we have minor arterials as well, and those are like Stevens Drive through town, Aaron Drive, some of those smaller streets that still have a lot of traffic volume, but not as much as our principal arterial streets, but they serve somewhat of the same purpose, and they connect those principal arterial streets.
Mm-hmm.
Then we have collector streets, which again collect trips from the neighborhoods and where people live and distribute them to those arterial streets so that they can get where they need to go. And then we have residential or local streets that their function is to get you to your house or within your neighborhood and that sort of thing. And they have lower volumes on them.
Is volume the threshold? Is that how you determine what category it is?
It's not the only threshold. There's character of the street. Is it a residential areas, or are there a lot of driveways accessing it? You know, what's the kind of zoning around it, as well as volume. Volume plays a big role in it. So
it's not exact science, it's a combination of a bunch of different factors.
correct, and we actually have to work through the state to identify those classifications, and we're going through a process right now where we're kind of reclassifying or some of our streets as part of a federal mandate through the Transportation Act to revisit those and make sure that they're classified correctly. And part of that process is to look at the character, and then we make an application that goes through our Council of Governments if we want to do a change, and then they get sent up to the Department of Transportation, and they review those and ask questions, and then we'll approve whether that can be reclassified or not. So
And is that for all of them, or including the local?
it's primarily for the arterials and collectors, not necessarily the residentials, but the local streets are what's remaining, so
Right.
by default you kind of get there.
So how are roads built? I mean, city builds roads, developers build roads.
Right. We get roads built in a number of different ways. We have different funding sources that we use as well. So typically, developments, when they come in, they will build the residential streets because they need them to serve the houses. If there is a collector street within that development that they need to have in order to access that development, they're required to build that as well. And in South Richland, we have a traffic impact fee program that collects a fee based on the number of trips a development generates, and that money gets pooled in and pays for those collector streets within South Richland. So a developer will build the street and pay for it up front, and then they get reimbursed through the impact fee program for the cost of really the rural section of that collector street. So the city's not having to come up with the money up front to build those streets. The developers are building them, and then they're getting paid back through that fee system. So that's the primary way we get those types of streets built. If we need larger arterial streets, generally those are built through a grant funding program, either with federal money in combination with city money, and we'll do those, build those as a city project and construct those.
And those would be long-term projects, so those would be in the tip well before you start breaking ground, correct?
Correct.
And there's a variety of types of streets. You've got a boulevard, which some of our boulevards aren't true boulevards. What kicks in with the style of the street? Because they've got styles, they've got the bike lanes and stuff like that.
Yeah, so all of our roadway sections that we have for our different types of streets feature bike lanes and vehicle lanes and sidewalks. So generally, if we're going to do a center median or something like that that's landscaped, those are kind of specialty amenities that we have to the streets, and so they will be a result of a beautification effort, that the city wants to do or a developer wants to do in a certain development, and so those are kind of separate from what a typical street would get built, but we do put those in some locations.
So who pays for the ongoing maintenance of a beautification project? Assuming landscaping is living landscaping, or is it only hardscape?
It can be both, and it can be both. Either the city, that has to maintain that, or there can be an agreement with a developer or a business or something like that for a maintenance agreement for those types of treatments.
So we speak about maintenance, and maintenance is an issue with some of our older streets. How do you determine how the streets are maintained? So
we have a pavement management program that we've initiated a couple of years ago. And so what we've done is we've had all of our streets visually rated for a pavement condition every street in the city. We've had that done twice now. And so that gives us a value assigned to the condition of the pavement. And so we have a treatment program that involves either just crack sealing or slurry seals or overlays or full reconstructions that's based on the condition level of a street. So we have a computer program that we use that takes the budget into account, those treatments into account, and the conditions into account, and kind of selects what streets you should be doing to get the most life out of your pavements based on the budget that you have. And so that's how we choose our streets today. And we've been doing that the last couple years now. And slurry seals, we did a slurry project last year, and that was really kind of the first major slurry treatment in the city, and we're planning on doing that again this year and going forward. And so budget amounts will dictate how much of that we do each year, but we do plan on doing those types of treatments each year.
So I do want to talk about slurry seal in a second, but for those that, again, only see black pavement and don't understand the differences between those techniques, can you briefly describe each one of them? You talked about the crack sealing, the overlay, slurry seal, and then a complete reconstruction. Are those the only four?
Pretty much, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so crack sealing is you probably see our streets crews out there a lot doing that, because we do quite a bit of that, which is good. And that's where they just put in a hot sealant into the cracks in the road just to seal them up, to keep water from getting down in those cracks, because that's what really causes the problem. Pavements crack. We have big temperature differentials here in the Tri-Cities, and so they expand and contract, and it causes cracks. So that's just something you have to do to maintain the life of the pavements. So that's kind of the first level of treatment. The second level is a slurry seal, and that's really a mixture of asphalt and rock that's put down wet, and it's a very thin layer that covers the entire surface and kind of rejuvenates the surface with oil and gives it a new wearing surface. And that's a very low-cost treatment as well, so we're able to get a lot of streets done on a tight budget with that. That generally lasts 5 to 7 to 10 year time frame, depending on how much traffic is on the street. So that's the next level. The next one up would be an overlay, an asphalt overlay, and that's where we come in with a paving machine, and we have hot mixture of asphalt that we get from the asphalt plants, and we usually put that down in a 2-inch layer, and that's substantially more costly than a slurry seal,
right,
but it's designed really to last 20 plus years. And so we generally will do those on streets that have a condition that's poor enough that a slurry seal isn't really the right treatment for it. They've gotten bad enough that they really need that more expensive treatment to preserve them. And then the streets that are really bad, we'll do one of two things. Either we'll reconstruct just the asphalt surface itself and remove the entire surface, reshape the rock, and then put a new surface down. Or if there's not a good base below that asphalt, we'll remove the rock and everything and put an entirely new surface down on that street. And those are significantly more expensive.
Right.
So we don't do those very often.
So is the plan with, you said that we have this new program that's a couple 2 or 3 years old, right? Is the plan to start taking care of our streets with some of the lower costs so that we eventually don't get to the higher cost, or stretch them out further? Is that what the long-term plan is?
Absolutely. There's a deterioration that every street goes through.
Right.
And if you let it sit over time, a lot of our local streets are 50, 60 years old and have had no treatments. So that's pretty impressive that they're in the condition they are in, given how old they are. But the idea is you don't let them get that bad.
Right.
And you can apply a lot lower cost treatments to those surfaces and extend the life significantly before they get bad enough that you need to do a major repair to them. So that's the idea, is to get as many streets done as you can and keep them in that good level, as opposed to letting them deteriorate and then having to fix them and only being able to fix a small amount because you don't have the budget to do it.
Right. So I'm envisioning slurry seal is really going to be taking the lead as our primary, as long as the road can handle it. Is that correct?
I think that would be a very fair statement to say. We have some catching up to do on some of our residential streets because we have some that are in pretty poor shape that are beyond a slurry seal treatment. But for the bulk of our streets, they're good enough that we can keep them. If we can keep them at that level, that's the ideal thing to do. And a slurry seal is definitely the treatment of choice for that.
So everyone's always interested in their own backyard, of course, or their front yard in this situation. How would someone know in an older part of Richland what the timeline would be for their road? Is that something that they'd be able to look up or they'd be able to call?
Yeah, there's nothing that they can look up on their own to see that condition at this point in time. They can certainly call and ask the question. We don't have, while we try to, budgeting wise, try to look at a 10-year horizon, project specific wise, we can't look that far ahead.
Right.
But we do try to look in a 3-year cycle to try to anticipate what we're going to do the next couple of years. So we can certainly look up and see and tell residents what the condition of their street is in the program and explain why it's in that condition, and try to let them know when they might be able to expect some kind of treatment.
Right. So slurry seal, it's coming up here pretty soon. Do you want to talk about where we did it last year and where we're going this year?
So the way we've kind of structured the pavement management to date is we really broke the city up into thirds. So the idea was we would do South Richland last year, which we did. We worked in the Willowbrook area and Hills West. And then we do Central Core Richland this year, really up to Van Giesen. And then we plan on doing North Richland, Van Giesen North next year. And that's mainly due to construction and contractor staging and that sort of thing. To have a contractor move from one end of the city to the other on a little portion of street doesn't make a lot of sense. We try to focus them in an area to keep mobilization costs down. And so this year we're planning on doing more core Central Richland, and we've got a number of streets that we'll be doing this year. Next year will be North Richland. So.
And it's a fast process.
Yeah, it really is very quick. We do our slurry program that we've done the last 2 years, they're done in a week, and they touch a lot of streets. So compared to an overlay project that has a lot of work involved and takes a lot longer impact to the street, a street that gets slurry sealed is usually, they started in the morning, they're done in a couple hours. It has to sit for a couple hours to cure, then it's open, and then they're not back again. So it really is a low impact, quick moving process. So
we've put together a video on it, and it's interesting to watch how fast, because there's workers that are walking with the truck, and to see how fast they're walking. It's not this slow process at all. We think of all the equipment when we see large road projects, and it's this really slow moving large vehicles versus this. It's just moving, and these people are almost running after the truck. It's interesting.
Yeah, and there's really kind of two types of those treatment. There's a slurry seal and there's what's called a microsurface, and they're really, you get the same end product. The microsurface just has cement in it, which makes it set up faster. So we may be looking at using those on more arterial streets, the larger volume streets, or that have a lot of businesses and that sort of thing that are impacted by being closed for 5 hours, in front, because that can set, you can have traffic back on that in about a half an hour after you've placed it. So that's an even quicker process.
So is it more expensive?
It is slightly more expensive. So
you don't get as much road?
No, but it's not a lot more expensive. And so it certainly makes sense in areas like I said, that have higher traffic volumes that are, and have different impacts to being closed. So,
But the end product is the same? I know.
end product is the same.
There's some other roads in our region that are treated with a different treatment that's more laid down something that is
a
sticky.
chip seal.
Thank you.
Yep, that's a chip seal, and we do that. We've done that in the floodplain area down by the Yakima River off of Van Giesen, because those streets were built from that essentially, and so we continue to maintain them that way. But yeah, that is another treatment option that's available. We choose not to do that at this point in time because it does have it's a lot more messy, has a lot more cleanup, is actually more expensive than a slurry seal.
Oh, interesting.
So, but you essentially get the same thing, except for you're applying it in layers. You put the oil down first, then you sprinkle the rock on top of that, and then traffic kind of beats the rock down into the oil, and then you come back and sweep it, and then you put a fog seal, a light coat of oil on the top of it to kind of hold it all together and make it black. And so it's a lot more involved, and you get a lot more rock, excess rock that you have to deal with, and you get a rougher surface as well, which bicyclists obviously don't like, and so we try to stay away from that.
I was going to ask you a question, but I'm going to jump a little bit. So you mentioned cyclists, because that's one of the things that is taken into consideration with our planning of our roads, correct?
Absolutely, yeah.
So you take into consideration the fact that we have cyclists where they need to go, the crossings. I know on Lee Boulevard, when we put in, when we redid that a few years ago, we talked about a bike lane plus, a parking lane and how all of those components work together.
Right, and we do work with the bicycle community a lot. We have a bicycle plan in the city of Richland. We work with the Council of Governments on a regional bicycle plan. And so our roadway sections and the projects that we do try to focus on areas where bicyclists are going to be, where they identify the routes they need to be that make the most sense, and we try to accommodate those in our designs. So.
And also part of the TIP process is not only going to what we would perceive as traditional forms of committees for approval, but you also go to the parks. And do you want to explain why?
Yeah, we take our 6-year TIP to both the Parks and Recreation Commission and the Planning Commission for review and recommendations to council. And we do that because part of the Transportation Improvement Program, the 6-year plan, has to include non-motorized transportation projects as well. And so we have a number of pathway projects that we include in there. And those are really the focus of the Parks and Rec Commission in helping us prioritize where those need to be, what order they should be built in and pursue funding for, and those types of things. So, yeah, that's a key component of our plan.
And the assumption is that they don't change too much since it's a long-term plan. So it's once you've got the momentum and a consensus with, moving forward on a path, that year after year you should just be building upon it versus you guys aren't throwing a fastball or anything like that at them. Correct.
And that's generally what happens. The only thing that may come up is if development changes,
right.
Then what was planned, priorities may shift on which ones get built first. And so that's and then as we complete projects, what are the next projects that we need to start putting into the TIP to be planning for into the future.
Okay, so I'm going to jump to your projects again. We're doing a full reconstruction on Meadowview Lane, correct?
Yeah, we're doing a surface reconstruction.
Surface reconstruction
on Mountain View.
Mountain View Lane.
Yep. And so because that pavement is in pretty rough shape, a lot of cracks all over it, and so we're removing that entire asphalt surface, regrading the rock that's there, and putting a new surface down, along with a few utility upgrades and storm upgrades and ADA accessibility upgrades on the ramps.
near the end of time, and we didn't get to all the projects that we had talked about or that we'd wanted to talk about today. What are some of the major projects that people will see this summer?
The biggest one that they're going to see is the Stevens Drive extension project. So that'll be extending Stevens Drive from Lee Boulevard and connecting it to Welshon Way across from Wellhouse Loop. And so that's going to be a new piece of roadway. It will have new connections to Goethals, new connections to Welshon Way. And so that's going to be a pretty major project.
Huge.
It's going to be starting very soon. So it's going to have the full treatment of our roadway sections. It'll have LED street lights. It'll have street trees. It'll have sidewalks and bike lanes. And all those features with that road. So we're pretty excited to get that built. And that's really the first piece to that Dupertail-Stevens corridor.
Right.
So next year, people will see Dupertail Street extending from Welshon up to Thayer Drive, and then reconstructing Dupertail Street from Thayer to Wright. So we've got some good projects coming up. So.
And those, again, they've been in the tip for years, and I know that you guys reach out to the public well in advance. We've been talking about that Stevens Drive extension for well over a year, as well as incorporating the Dupertail extension once we punch up to Thayer. We've already started talking about that, and that project's not even slated to happen until next year.
Correct. Yeah, we've had great attendance at open houses for both those projects and other projects that we're planning on doing in the future. And so that has been very helpful, and people are understanding, how it impacts their neighborhood and what they can expect and kind of timelines, and gives a good line of communications. People can feel free to call and ask questions. We'd love to talk to people and explain what we're doing, why we're doing it, what impacts they have. Just helps educate people on what we're doing.
So one of the projects that we don't have a direct timeline right now on is South George Washington Way. Do you want to, I know that we've done an entire profile on that before, but that's another outreach that we'll be working on and getting feedback as well.
Absolutely, and we're excited for that. We think we've got some pretty good alternatives that we're getting ready to go to an open house with in June, and get the public's feedback on that. We'll have an online survey that people will be able to take and give us their feedback on, similar to the Queensgate corridor study that we just did.
Right.
And had an excellent open house, well-attended open house, and survey feedback from that project. So yeah, there's a lot of interest in George Washington Way and the intersection with Columbia Point Drive. We get a lot of traffic through there, so it's a big, important project for people.
And it's been interesting from a communication standpoint how vested in that public piece you guys are from Public Works. You want to know what people's thoughts are, and through explaining what the long-term plan is, you still want to hear what people's worries and concerns are, what they're happy about, so that you can start morphing this, I wouldn't say perfect, but as near or close to perfect project as possible. It's been interesting.
Yeah, absolutely, and all that input helps us because sometimes people have a concern that we can address in the design. We can add a special treatment or a feature to the project that really isn't that big of a deal as far as a project goes, but it makes a huge difference to the neighbors or the residents that are impacted by that. So yeah, the feedback that we get is invaluable, and we certainly don't have our minds set on what it's going to be, and we're just going to do what we want to do.
Right.
Because and it's for the community, so
right.
we really need to know what the community thinks and how we can do it better. So
perfect. Thank you so much for joining us.
You're welcome.
And thank you. I look forward to seeing you next time.